Hello and welcome. My name is Shannon Kemp, and I'm the Chief Digital Officer for Dataversity. We want to thank you for joining the latest in the monthly webinar series, Data Architecture Strategies with Donna Burbank. Today, Donna will discuss data architecture versus enterprise architecture. Just a couple of points to get us started. Due to the large number of people that attend these sessions, you will be muted during the webinar. For questions, we'll be collecting them via the Q&A panel. And if you'd like to chat with us or with each other, we certainly encourage you to do so. And just to note, the chat defaults to send to just the panelists. We may absolutely change that to network with everyone. To open the chat and the Q&A panels, you will find those icons in the bottom middle of your screen to enable those features. And as always, we will send a follow-up email within 2 business days containing links to the slides and the recording of this session, as well as any additional information requested throughout the webinar. Now, let me introduce the speaker of this monthly series, Donna Burbank. Donna is a recognized industry expert in information management with over 20 years of experience helping organizations enrich their business opportunities through data and information. She currently is the managing director of Global Data Strategy Limited, where she assists organizations around the globe in driving value from their data. And with that, let me give the floor to Donna to begin her presentation. Donna, hello and welcome.
Hello, thanks so much. Appreciate the introduction. Thanks everyone for joining. Nice to see some familiar names as always. Always a very active crowd in the chat and questions, so love it. As Shannon mentioned, this is a series with Dataversity that we've been doing for a few years now. If this is your first time, welcome. If this is your first time, I'll let you know that Dataversity does a great job of keeping all of these recordings. Another question we always get is, will you get the slides? Yes, we will. Shannon's team will share those later. But if you missed any of the ones earlier in the year, they are all on demand, both on the Dataversity site and also on the Global Data Strategy site. We provide a link to those as well. And today we're talking about data architecture and enterprise architecture. Also, if you are interested in any of those other topics later this year, data quality with my colleague Nigel Turner, et cetera, please join us again. But let's jump right into what we want to talk about today, which is enterprise architecture, which many of you I'm sure are aware of, which is part of the reasons you've joined. I think before I get into what we're going to talk about, I might talk a little bit about the why. And Shannon in her introduction mentioned that I work for a consultancy called Global Data Strategy, not to give us a shameless plug, which I just did, but more so what I try to add in these webinars is real world experience. And I just want to, I don't know, toot the horn of enterprise architecture in that sometimes it gets a maybe negative reputation, that it feels too heavy, too bloated, too academic in a negative way. And why do we do it? And I would say it's absolutely the opposite. We use these every day at multiple clients. And the reason I started using them is this: they are just so effective. And so one of the things I'll add, and sometimes I ramble on, but I'll try to ramble on the most on the success stories, because I think that's the stuff all of us in the industry need to promote more of, because these things just work and they make so much sense when you see them in that light. So I'm going to try to give a healthy dose of that today. But let's move on. So if you are new to enterprise architecture, I'm sure you understand what architecture is, right? It's the design, or you may be a data architecture, and that's the design of data. Well, there's a whole enterprise out there, right? There's data, there's business processes, there's applications, there's people's motivations. Can we model that out? So anything in an organization can be designed, modeled, and organized and linked together. And I think that's one of the things I love about enterprise architecture. I mean, I did a stint in my career working for a pure enterprise architecture consultancy, learned a lot there. But I felt like it just spoke to my natural inclination. And so of designing things, understanding how things work together. And I think that's how a lot of architects in any industry, not just data architecture, but, building architects, right? I think that's what makes it an architect. So I was really jazzed as I learned about new architecture patterns to model other things, and how that fits with data. So that's really where enterprise architecture fits together. If you've joined me before, you've seen that I often quote the Gartner IT glossary with some of their definitions. And as they talked about enterprise architecture, I also felt like maybe I had found my people, right? They don't talk about enterprise architecture just in terms of, and I hate to use the word academic in a negative way, because I love academia, right? But often it's used that way to sort of be in business as slow and unwieldy, And that's absolutely the opposite of enterprise architecture. And use think of the words Gartner is using. It's responses to disruptive forces and identifying execution of change with vision and outcomes, and evolving your future state architecture. And that's absolutely how I feel about it. You need to understand your foundation, but why you're doing that is not just for the fun of it. Yes, I find it fun, full disclosure. You can probably hear it in my voice, but I'm doing it because we're trying to build a business transformation, or we're trying to optimize our system, or really make not only more efficient, but come up with new ideas. And what's the best way to come up with new ideas is to draw it out, right, and design it. And that's, I think, what sometimes I've seen in the past had been lost with enterprise architecture. And we need to get that back and promote that, because it happens all the time. And I find that's the exciting part of it, is putting different disciplines together and seeing that synergy and what comes out of it. Um, so I kind of talked about this already, but enterprise architecture, for a data architect, just think of that. I know how to model data at logical, physical, conceptual level. I can model people's motivations, people's goals, business capabilities, business processes, data, networks, everything can be designed. And I will also probably repeat myself on this webinar as I do, that this doesn't have to be big and heavy or even need a tool. I'm a fan of tools. I've helped develop some of these tools in the market, but just whiteboard it. Even drawing out your business process. I work with one client. We just started with a whiteboard. And I think her comment was, wow, when you actually draw out our processes, we look crazy, don't we? And nobody individually was trying to do something crazy, but people were sending documents back to each other and sending it around, and it hadn't been designed out. So the simple act of, I'm a big fan of doing these things through workshops, and just start. Yes, at the end, you might need to put that in a tool and really do it at a more rigorous level. But the amount of benefit I have gotten and continue to get, even, I don't want to say just, because designing a workshop is a first order thing, right? Getting people together, but just spending an hour or just spending a half a day getting folks together, starting to draw this out, can be exponential in terms of the benefit you get. So if you haven't done any of these, give some of them a try. And I think also some of us on the call might be in the architecture world or the data world, bit of perfectionists. And or what do we, imposter syndrome or whatever it is, sometimes starting out in a whiteboard just takes some of that away, or putting sticky notes, right? That can be the great, or a Miro board right now or other, kind of sharing software, maybe the gamification of it or the simplification of it. That is, I know one of my first workshops in the modern age, when someone brought in sticky notes, I sort of rolled my eyes. I'm like, seriously, we're in the digital age and you're bringing out sticky notes and pencils? But it was a really helpful way to get people to step back and kind of detach from some of the tech and really think about the topic. So big fan of all those sort of things to get yourself started. So I talked about keeping it light, keeping it fun, starting with any method, even if it's quote just a whiteboard. But there are very rigorous ways to look at enterprise architecture. It is a whole industry out there. I'm not nothing here. I've fully created myself here. A common one that a lot of us know, particularly in the DAMA world, because John Zachman is very active in kind of the DAMA world. He created the Zachman framework. And it really is just a simple way. And that's what I love about enterprise architecture. It is a lot of simple ways of looking at complex things, right? And Zachman kind of looks at the organization with that who, what, where, why, when. The what is typically where we are with the data. Your what is your nouns of the company, right? Your products, your customers, your students, your patients, your locations, all of those sorts of things. But the beauty of this and the simplicity is, well, how do our customers link with our business processes? How do our vendors link in? All of that, or how do the why, et cetera, et cetera. So we'll go through some of these. By no means is this one webinar a whole, coverage of all of the enterprise architecture disciplines, but it's meant to be. I think if you're a data architect on the call, knowing just enough with the data lens. And in fact, it was on some of my intro slide. I am on the board of the Dimbach 3, and I think that's part of the conversation we're having, is like, when do you recreate other box out there, right? There were other, what do you call it, methodologies. We're not recreating enterprise architecture, but there is a lens for data architects. What is that touch point? I think is what we need to think of with things like DAMA, with things like Dataversity, which are, what does enterprise architecture mean for data architecture or for data? And what are those touch points? Not recreating all of the network diagrams on the planet that have already been done. It's how does this relate to data? So that's Zachman, friend of mine, good person, good architecture. And then also, I mean, I'll just list two. There are others as well. TOGAF is another one that's fairly popular out there. And there's certifications and there's software and, it's a whole thing. And I'm doing it just with one slide. But they have a similar vision as well. Which is let's not only look at data, but let's look at the business itself, look at the applications, let's look at the tech, et cetera, et cetera. And they have a whole framework as well. So not going to do justice on one slide, but just want to kind of give folks aware that these are two of others that you can kind of look at to do a deeper dive if some of this stuff is new and you're like, ooh, I want to really do more, because I'm, again, not doing justice to any of the methodologies I'm going to show today. So, as I just sort of talked about, how I'm looking at it today is through that data lens. And it's nothing more, again, even the word enterprise architecture kind of sounds highfalutin and like a big thing. I just think about it and why I started doing it so often. I've been told I'm kind of a big picture thinker, and maybe one of my strengths is putting things together into puzzles. And I just couldn't help but think, okay, I'm looking at data, but how does this fit with everything else? How does this, what's the why behind my data? And by doing that, you automatically think of the business, which is motivation models and business capability models and business drivers and business process, which is how people are, especially those of you who might be doing data governance and or master data management, et cetera, et cetera. I will suggest strongly that you cannot do those in a vacuum. They are absolutely embedded in your business process, because a person doing a process is putting data in a system or touching data or updating data, right? So you can't not look at that. I think the data view, that third column there, is, I think many of us on the call are familiar with. I'm making an assumption here, which are your conceptual data models, but even things like, I don't say just, but glossaries, right? Those are business terms, but that's data, right? And is down to your physical and even system architecture diagrams, et cetera. And then how do we link those together? I'm listing one, mapping data to process, but you can, and I'll show some examples, you can map data to capabilities, data to motivations, data to the what, all of this. I think that's the beauty of doing these, especially as you're trying to get things like business buy-in and business prioritization and business governance and things like that. So that's our lens today. Okay, this I like to show actual data results in some of these. So Dataversity and Global Data Strategy have partnered over the years to do a survey each year on architecture with, again, a lens to data architecture. But one of the questions we've asked is, what models do you use even other than data? So I could spend a whole webinar on this one slide, but I won't. One of the things I like to see is that logical and conceptual are really up at the top. I don't know why I'm still told that people don't do business-centric data models, and I don't know how, because I do them all the time. That to me, I, I want to say more critical than a physical data model, but they are absolutely critical when you're trying to get alignment with the business, which so many of us are with things like data governance and things like that. Just a little note, we've found over the years, you'll see that logical and conceptual are pretty close, and maybe there's a margin of error there. Sometimes it's conceptual that is number one. The past few years it's been conceptual. This year logical went to the top. I'm thinking that they're sort of the same, but with some margin of error, right? Some of the more interesting things here, business process models are fairly in the realm of things up there higher, which I think is great. I do that all the time. How is data used, consumed in a business process? One of the ones I will talk about later that isn't as high as I'd like, you can see kind of in the middle there, CRUD matrices, terrible name for a very helpful tool, kind of showing how data is created, used, updated, and deleted. Only 10% there. Hopefully after this webinar will be higher. A super simple tool that has a lot of benefits. But I just found this interesting to see, of all the things we're talking about in the data world, who's using what. So motoring along, I guess another thing, and I've sort of touched on this, but we've all, I think, if we're architects, kind of used the home building or building, construction, analogy here of, you design, and I think you may have worked with an architect, or if you're building a major, industrial complex, you certainly need sort of a design document before you just start, hammering nails or that sort of thing. So I think when you're doing that with a house, it's so clear that the thing on paper that your architect comes with a rolled up think of paper and shows you, or online nowadays, is very different than the person on the right actually pouring concrete and, you know, put it in the metal barring and things like that, right? But in software, sometimes, or data or analytics, sometimes that distinction's a little more blurred, and there is the temptation. I get it. We all love to build things. Probably we went into data or software or tech because we like to build things, but I also like to build, around my house on the weekends too. But I still would design out my shed before we start hammering nails, right? It does some sort of design. So I think if anyone on this call isn't convinced of the need to design before you build, just think of a skyscraper. Somebody in your enterprise, you're probably here on the call because you work for an enterprise. If you're a two-person shop selling, I don't know, lemonade on the side of the street, you win, right? I don't think you probably need a full data model for that, although it might be fun to do. Um, but if you're working for an enterprise, I think you do, right? So if you are building a shed in the backyard, you may not need to design it, but if you're at an enterprise and you're building a skyscraper, pretty sure you need a design. So it's a similar analogy with data there. And here's a weird Donna-ism here, but if anyone's familiar with the god Janus, that's how January was named, right? And the idea of the god Janus is that he's a two-headed god with kind of a head towards one year and then a head looking back to the previous year. Kind of my weird interpretation of this is a good data architect is sort of like that you're always doing that swivel head sort of thing where half of you is looking at the business and understanding the business drivers, and half of you should be looking at the tech, right? So for a data modeler, that's your conceptual, logical, physical implementation models. But that to me is where enterprise architecture fits with data architecture, right? Really that holistic thing. A good data architect, I will argue, really does need to have his or her head in both worlds. At a minimum, the business and tech, and then there's flavors of business and flavors of tech. That's where a lot of these diagrams come in really helpfully, especially in this enterprise architecture view. So let's go through some of them. This is going to be the typical Donna whirlwind tour, but again, this isn't meant to be an entire course on how to do a business capability model. There are other, solutions for that. But hopefully it may introduce you to some new models or how to use these models you might have seen in the past, just to kind of give that overview and hopefully also with some of these case studies, why they're helpful, right? So let's jump right in. One that I use all the time, and I will admit, the first one I saw, it just felt fluffy to me, but I'm learning the fluffy stuff is the hard stuff, the business stuff, the motivation stuff. It's the idea of and there's other versions of this, and this is obviously a fictitious company, Artful Art Supplies, of it really gets to the why. Think of the Zachman framework with the motivation or the why column. What we do and when we build this in our practice, kind of that top half is what's motivating the company, right? There's a corporate mission and vision statement. If you don't know what your organization's mission and vision is, go take a look. I bet it is out there. And if you are not aligning to that and you're wondering why you're not getting buy-in on your project, this could be why, right? What are the internal and external drivers of your company? And this is where you're starting to merge between almost being a, I don't know, data architect to management consultant in a way. And it's not your job to redesign your organization, but to align with it. I bet you if you're a public company and there's a annual report, have you read it? I'm a big nerd about annual reports. My team members know that. I talk about them all the time. I bet you this is in that first 5 pages. They're very clear on why we're doing what we're doing, what they're seeing in the market, and how we're reacting to it. So the thing on the left is what we're seeing in the market. This is a fictitious art company. They're not yet online, and everybody else is, and they need to really get online and have a social media for other people doing knitting or whatever crafts people are doing, right? Internally, that means they need a better view of customer, and they need to build communities, and they need to grow revenue and reduce costs and all that kind of thing. So your internal drivers are reactions to the external drivers. Some of you may say, well, no, we don't have an annual report. Management doesn't publish this. We don't know. I hear this all the time. There is no business strategy. Well, I bet you there is. And if you are truly right and you can't find it, I don't know, take an educated guess. You're selling widgets. Probably selling more widgets is probably a good driver, and selling it more cost effectively, right, is another driver. So, you don't want to over assume, but generally when I work with a business, they're happy to guide me as well of, oh, you got a 60% right, or it'll get them thinking, oh, right, yeah, well, how about this, right? And that's really what these are. they're tools for communication, really. And that's why I can be a little flexible with the design. Like maybe at a financial company that looks more serious, maybe at a toy company, it's a little more fanciful here, right? But and this is somewhere in the middle. And then at the bottom is a reaction, right? So if you have the mission and vision, which is the why of the company, external drivers drives the internal drivers of, what are we facing? What do we do about it? And then at the bottom, those are your data-centric goals and objectives to how does data support the things above? Um, and these are sort of marginal ones. I've seen more motivational ones that I see, so that, we're trying to be the best art company online. We need to have quality, just like our products have quality, data has to have quality. We need to be accountable for our data. We need to build a cultural around data. So it's almost like a markety kind of slide so that a normal non-data person can understand it. And it helps you as the data architect or the data person to really make sure what you're doing is aligning to the company's goals. So big fan of this type of, and all of these you will see the way I often do them, at least to start. Again, I'm not belittling all of the enterprise architecture layers, but to start, especially as it relates to data, I'm a big fan of the one pager. Just do a one page, overlay the data on top of that, and that'll get you a long way before you go into a lot more detail, which we are wants to do, I think, a lot as data people. And sometimes just bringing it up a level and getting out of that detail and seeing the big picture is really where enterprise architecture can fit. So another one I have used, I don't use as often. I know when I was working for a enterprise architecture company, we did a lot of these, but they are a cool tool. These are all just tools in a toolkit where, okay, now we have our business drivers and there's different use cases, right? Because there's going to be a lot. It's almost like your backlog on steroids, right? We're trying to do, and some of these, it was, customer insights and data, marketing and sentiment analysis. And then sort of on the right were either regions or data areas. I often do this with sort of data overlay, and you can start to see a heat map of all the things we need to do. Really, where does some of your data come in? So this can be helpful, especially large organizations where there's so many use cases and so much data. You really need to map it out. Again, if you're doing a lemonade stand, probably not, but most of you are, I think, a bit bigger than that. So something to think through. Business capability models, I am a fan of. Often, and I should have mentioned this earlier, do you always need to create these yourself? I have, I will, don't be, what's the, imposter syndrome? Don't worry so much, don't try to promise what you're not. But I think a lot of these are fairly at this high level, straightforward enough that the value you'll get from trying will be better than maybe I don't know, you mixed level 2 and level 3 of your business capabilities that a real full enterprise architecture might mention, but the value will be a lot. And there may be an enterprise architecture team where these already exist and then use them. That is even better, right? So ask, and that's something as the consultant that often come in, is there already a business capability? Is there already a motivation model or that sort of thing developed? You'll probably find some allies, and I'll talk a little bit later about this. You also get the pulse of how the company thinks about itself. Are we thinking in terms of capabilities? Do we think in terms of processes? Do we think in terms of, right? So each company kind of organizes itself differently, and I find that kind of interesting as well. And I'll give an example of that in a bit. So this is Artful Art Supplies, our fictitious company. And what a capability model is, it's kind of like an org chart and it's kind of like a process model, but it's neither of them. It truly is your capabilities and a way of thinking of it. And the beauty of it doing this way, you'll see here probably areas that you recognize, right? Product development, marketing, sales, human resources, legal, right? Those are capabilities. I have the capability of marketing our product, and there may very well be a organization or a department also called marketing, but maybe not. Maybe there's no department called marketing, but you have a capability of marketing, or maybe the capability of marketing is done in product development, or maybe they changed the word marketing to, product promotion team, right? That doesn't matter because organizations change, capabilities are different and they change not as much. I might reorg my sales team, but I still have the capability of sales. And then there's sub capabilities within them, right? So I think this is a helpful way to look at a company. It really gets down to the bones of what do we do. And then you can sort of say, here's another heat map kind of a approach to that. I have customer data, and no surprise, that's used by marketing. It's also used by sales. It's used, et cetera, et cetera. And you can really kind of see, especially as you're doing things like data governance and or master data management, and I'm looking at product, do I have representation from, oops, sorry, from R&D and marketing and all the folks who are touching product, even legal? Had we thought of legal? Wow, yeah, that's maybe they need to be involved in the conversations, right? So I find these really helpful. I'll jump right into where somehow my finger wanted to go. With a great case study we did where this was a merger between some of the largest insurance companies in both the UK and the US, and they did a merger. What was interesting, and we were sort of embedded in the team as consultants, but we listened to kind of the launch of that, and the CEO of the combined companies in his kickoff basically said, one of the reasons we merged these two companies was the combined information or data assets is one of our biggest strategic advantages. He got it, right? And that's probably true for a lot of mergers nowadays. And you may have seen on some of my other webinars, there's a World Economic Forum uh, presentation where basically they say, data is really the more valuable asset than even the products that companies sell, right? In today's day and age, data is a strategic asset and advantage. So this CEO got that. But then the devil's in the details, right? And so it wasn't just a data problem. It was you're now streamlining two companies, and think of the politics on that one, right? You have a finance team. Which one wins out? Do we merge the finance teams? Even underwriting team, et cetera. And then the data is structured in a different way. So partly to clarify the two orgs, and are they very different? Is finance, or are there different capabilities in each organization? We started by doing capability models for each company. In some cases, there was overlap. They both had HR capabilities, for example. And then it was a little less political of which org are we keeping, which department are we keeping. We were looking purely at capabilities. We weren't defining who to keep, but in terms of the data, we're integrating, although that was part of the decision of the company. How do we integrate HR capability data, not London's data versus New York's data or whatever, right? It was just the capability of human resources and managing people, right? In some cases, we were also able to see that company A had some different capabilities than company B that was merged. So that made the data integration easier. And then you're also really in the business. That's what the business was literally doing. And this company thought very much in terms of capabilities, which was, we also kind of got the pulse of how that merger was going. And we were really in those rooms in that conversation as the data people, which was kind of interesting. Whereas if we had just looked at the data, we wouldn't have been speaking their language. And I think that's where enterprise architecture comes in. You're speaking the language of the business. So this one worked really, really well. Merger was a success. Yes, there were bumps in the road. Devil was in the details, but this really helped with a lot of the prioritization in the organization and definitely with the governance. I'm also a fan of looking at your organizational capability when we do look at governance. And so this does sometimes go a little bit more into org structure and not only capabilities, but it's kind of where they merge. How is the company organized? Is it hierarchical? Is it federated? Is it distributed? What teams are involved with data? And that really should help define who your committees are. If you've heard me talk about governance, you've probably heard me say this before too. I always get nervous when I say, or someone's starting a governance team and they're saying, who's on it? Well, Mary and Joe and Stephen, because they really like data and I've been working with them. But that's not who is Stephen representing? Who are they accountable for? So Stephen should be accountable for the HR data because Stephen's in HR, right? So looking at it that way. Yes, you need to put names on it, but you really should be thinking of capabilities of the org or org structures of the org, and then who has accountability within that. And sometimes separating it out that way for your governance can be really helpful. Okay, data models. And we knew we'd get here. My favorite, big fan of data models, full disclosure, right? So there are levels of data model. So at the business side, it can be at the conceptual, logical. Some larger companies even do sort of an enterprise layer. And this is very much in the lingo of of enterprise architecture, often you kind of have level 1, level 2, level 3, different levels of detail. I'm going to start at the conceptual level and in my examples. But the pyramid is also to show that your physical table might have thousands of physical tables, but can you roll that up into the concept of all of these 1,000 tables linked to customer? And is a customer different than a client? And is a client different than a prospect? Right. So you really, and folks can argue, but a large organizations should still have a conceptual data model that can fit on a page, right? Because you really should be rolling it up. Your logical model might take a page or two as you get into more detail, and your physical data model might span 6 walls of printed paper, right? But the idea of the conceptual is to really get to those core business concepts and business rules, and the audience is the business. Here's an example of maybe not the most beautiful one, but you'll see here there's employees and sales reps. And is the sales rep different than a support rep? And what's a customer versus the company that the customer works for, and things like that. I'm a proponent of always using the business language in your conceptual data model, not generic things like party, unless you're a law firm and there's a party and a lawsuit, and that's how the business uses it, or you're a party planning company, right? And so because it starts to tell the story, this software that I used here, they can publish out the definitions right on your conceptual data model, which I love because it's almost a glossary on steroids, right? You can see here, an employee is a full or part-time worker on an active payroll. Whoa, 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 we don't do part-time employees as employees. They're called something else, right? Well, people can see it right there. So that's your conceptual data model that actually should always be a business-centric. Business people get these. Be a whole other webinar, and is one on, does the business engage with conceptual data models? Yes, all the time. And if that's not the case with you, let's talk. Because 95% of the time have really good success with presenting data in a way like this with a conceptual data model to business people, because it is their business. They're telling you the story, and you're listening and you're translating this into a really clear way. Logical is also for the business, but you're getting down to a little bit more detail. You are getting attributes, you may be getting data types, hierarchies, and things like that. And for those of you who have not had success with the business, this is where you are getting a little bit more technical, but it's still at the business level. And if you haven't had success, you just may not be presenting it in the right way, because or the right audience. Because once you get that right audience, you will have senior level people or people with day jobs that aren't data animated in a workshop arguing whether a product is different than a part, or is a raw material a part or a finished good, all of that. And can you order a product or can you order parts, right? Because this is what they're doing all day long. And you're describing the business, and you should be listening a whole lot too, because sometimes these hierarchies, and we've been doing a whole lot in master data management in our practice this year, last year, the year before, and sometimes a massive business problem / data quality problem is kind of in these hierarchies. Is the product the same as the brand? Is the brand the same as the component? And it's those kind of questions that can make or break a business, and mapping it out in a clear way can make you a hero. I've seen it, not just me, other folks do it, and it's because you're finally getting to the nut of the issue that's causing a problem to somebody. A great example of kind of putting data models and business capability together was a Dataversity webinar that is there. I mentioned that Dataversity keeps them all on their site. Kiewit, if you're not familiar with them, you probably are. I'm here in Boston this week, and if you've done kind of the big dig, they were part of that. Like, they build a lot of the infrastructure, the roads, the energy companies, the major industrial complexes of America. And they literally, when we talk about that example of design then build, we did not have to explain data models to a bunch of literal architects. They are very used to taking a high level model, of an electrical system, and then going down to different levels of business for a major power plant, because they kind of looked at us and said, how could you not do that? That we look at models all day long. So that they are, quote, business, we're modelers, they were architects and builders. What I loved about working with Kiewit is that they are a company of doers. And when you think of, when I mentioned your enterprise architecture can help you get the pulse of a business, I found, like, manufacturing often, I'll get there in a minute, thinks in terms of process. So going to the business and talking in a process model they kind of get that, right? We did some work with the financial services and their hierarchies, their data they thought in kind of in terms of data and analytics. So the data models they liked. When I went to Kiewit, even the execs had been out in the field that day in a hard hat, and we get work, we build work, and we take care of the stuff we built. And they kind of designed their whole that thing in the upper right really was a business capability model in my brain, right? It was very clearly to what are the things we do when they design we design stuff, we plan stuff, we control it, we construct it, we commission it out to the customer. And so we mapped all of our data to that. And it was a really helpful way for the business to understand the why of the data, to prioritize the data. And I found it fun because the organization had kind of done that work already, and it helped us understand the work, that's how they saw it in terms of the capabilities they did, because they were capable people who built stuff. So I won't talk much more about that because Kiewit they kind of joint presented and they spoke to it much better than I could. So go take a look at that if you're kind of interested in both data models, but maybe also how kind of business capabilities map with that. Okay, I talked a lot about process already. If you haven't worked with process models, they're another one. Just think of a workflow diagram, right? You can get fancy. I was on the BPMN finalization committee way back, and you can get really fancy and automate these. But really, at the end of the day, it's boxes and lines of workflow. I think we're all used to kind of flow charts. Just think of it at that. The idea is you have these swim lanes that are people, right? Or not people, organizations or capability, right? So I have product development doing a thing. They develop the product, and then it goes to supply chain accounting, and they do the costing and pricing. And then this is super high level. You can do detailed ones. Marketing does the product testing, product naming, right? I tend to do, and I kind of follow the BPMN and then I customize it a bit. They're a little bit light on the data, so I add more. Here, we almost put a little mini data model. What exactly does product development do? And you'll see these C's and U's, and we'll talk about that in a minute. Kind of your CRUD operations. That product development creates the code name and it creates the the component types and things like that. And then costing does the price. And then wait, market testing updates the price. Do they talking together, right? And we'll talk about that. This was kind of an anonymized version from a real client who was having problem with the pricing, and by kind of mapping out the business process and who touches what where, solve the problem, like literally. Like that's why I love these and I love to workshop these, and it's a great way to get, I say these swim lane people are really your data stewards, your data owners. What do you, Mr. Data Steward and Product Development, what data do you put in? Where? What data do you need from other people? And sometimes if you're doing governance, sometimes you feel like the bad guy or the naggy guy or something, right? You get marketing and product development talking together, and marketing will say, I don't know, or supply chain or shipping, you didn't give, I don't have any product dimensions when I'm trying to ship this thing out to Timbuktu. Product development, where is that? You're the people who build this out, and they discuss like, oh, I didn't know you need that. I'll put it in. And often it's as easy as that. People didn't know that the stuff they put in was used downstream. And I found 90% of the time, folks aren't trying to be difficult. They just didn't know someone else needed it. I don't put in extra data if I don't have to, and I'm a data person. So imagine a supply chain person who's really busy. If I don't know that data is needed by somebody else, but most people are generally empathetic, especially when that person's right in front of them, right? That's why I like workshops. People can talk it out, or why can't you get it, or what format you put it in metric and I need it in imperial, or vice versa, or whatever, right? It's a great way to kind of get that collaboration. A customer journey map, to me, probably some marketing people on the call that might take my definition might not be the same as yours, but it's kind of like a process, but from the customer's perspective, right? Partly because a journey, if I'm developing a product, yeah, you do A and B. It's almost like a manufacturing line in some ways. It can be very kind of mapped out. Customer journey, I think marketing people would love it if I went to a website, then always purchased and clicked here and then did this, right? But that's not how we buy things. I might have browsed the web and then I requested some literature, then I talked to a person, then I did this, and I went to a trade show, and not only am I as the customer kind of going all over the place. You're collecting data as you go, or data is being shared or maybe not shared with PI, right? So this might be something that your marketing team has created or a customer journey team has created, or try it yourself. Where are we getting data from, and where does this fit on the different journey, and who is supporting that customer along their journey, right? So the customer journey might be, we're looking at the website and then we purchase, but when they purchase, that isn't just, they have to talk to sales and supply chain and support. So just again, at a very high level, this is a great way to also workshop, get people's ideas of customer journey. We've also done this with student journey. I don't have the success story in this one. I probably should have. We did this with Arizona State University several years ago, and they did the student journey, and they mapped out how data was touched along the way, and super, super valuable to really understanding what student data we should keep and how we can use it and all of that, and patient data, citizen data, right? All that kind of thing where it isn't just ABC, and really understanding people and their engagement can be helpful. Moving ahead with that, I'll give a success story here where it is more on the manufacturing kind of thing. We work with a big pharmaceutical company, and if you've ever done kind of, I haven't, but I've worked with these people, clinical development of pharma products, et cetera. It is very, process driven, right? And so when we work with this team, we actually kind of mixed several of the diagrams that I mentioned before. One of them, in terms of motivation, was actually for the IT team. What are our capabilities? I meant capability model, not motivation, right? What are our capabilities? How do we explain our capabilities of what we do to the rest of the organization? How do we even get in front of really smart PhD people developing drugs and say, we can help you, right? And so then, and the second one was, what's the business capabilities, and then how do we map that? These are the clinical trials you're doing, this is our marketing of the product, this is the sales of our product, and where's the data kind of touching that? And then mapping out, and there was a gentleman in our team that, gosh, he was a data architect, but you might find this as well. You almost become so embedded in the business. He could explain the clinical trial process better. Well, he's an enterprise architect, better than probably some of the people who work there, because he did really great listening. And we mapped out the clinical trial process, and then we overlaid the data on top of that to say, where in the process do you need data? Where should it not be shared? Where are there gaps? What new information do you need? And it was a really helpful collaboration. It helped IT understand what was needed, and it helped the business, or the clinical development and marketing of that really explain what they needed. Here, in terms of words, they called them blueprints. They didn't really want to call them models and things like that, but for them, they kind of got it. It was a blueprint for what they did. Just in terms of a success story, and these are anonymized pictures, but I think the biggest success, if you went into the offices of these folks, they had these process models on their wall, and they had the data models on their wall, and they were sticky notes and pencil marks and updates to them. And kind of what they were saying, they said, this really helped us get to the nut of what we're doing and what data is needed. And then, of course, we would use those additions when we kind of did data governance and change management and the data change management, and sort of what we needed. So that really helped the architecture team really understand what was the prioritization, and it also helped kind of sell why they were valuable. It was a really great synergistic. The business got it, IT got what the business did, vice versa. And it was all through these kind of models and a whole lot of listening, right? And there was kind of education on both sides. So I thought that was kind of a fun example. But yeah, when they're printing out the diagrams on the wall and writing on them and coming back with suggestions, and for those of you who don't believe that, just try it, right? And if you use the right examples and do enough listening, I think I've said this in some of my data model webinars. My favorite feedback when I'm giving these workshops or facilitating these workshops is, hand me the pen, right? Because these are simple methodologies. They might not get it entirely right. Maybe the cardinality's off in a data model, but generally it's on the right track, right? And you're listening, you're letting them kind of develop these with you, and that's when it's sort of fun and productive. Okay, here's this CRUD matrix thing that I mentioned. So horrible name for a really helpful thing, but the CRUD stands for where data is created, read, updated, and deleted across these various areas of the organization, or the different players in the process, or however you've done this. They can be done in kind of different ways. But the idea is, here, for example, that third row down, product price is firstly created with supply chain, and then marketing updates it, and then finance reads it. So if they're reading the price wrong, it's the wrong price. Is it because they marketing updated it with the wrong price? Did they not know that marketing updated it and they took it from the supply chain price? And I'm giving that example because I think there's been 3 clients we worked with in the past 3 years that had this very problem. Price. You think, how hard is it to price your product globally and just have it on the website correctly? Like, well, let's have a chat, right? And often it's the process. The data is right somewhere, but is the right person getting it at the right time with the right update? And is the data being integrated? So these can be a really helpful way. And because they're so simple, it's back to that client that I mentioned earlier when they drew out the process. They said, we look crazy, right? And you can kind of see things that nobody is a bad person. Just nobody has had either the permission or the time or the ability to kind of step back and say, that I'll go that last one, product name. We've worked with 2 clients in the past 3 years that literally they launched a product with the wrong product name somewhere in the globe, or they had the code name still on the package, right? And it was just we fixed it with the CRUD matrix. Well, development created the code name, marketing never received it. They never updated it, or we never deleted an old product name that had been changed, right? It's just simple stuff like that. Think of these almost like checklists, and often checklists help you avoid some of these bad mistakes or find some of these issues that can seem really gnarly if this is a tool to really simplify that. And these process models and CRUD matrices fit really well together. That there's a process. I receive the customer order. Who's reading what data is being read, created, updated, deleted on each one of these different pieces of the process. So there's, again, different ways you can kind of draw these out. But that's the beauty of this. And then I don't have it on these slides, but those groups, accounting, shipping, fulfillment, sales, are often your data stewards. So we say, there's a data quality issue. Who updated that data? Well, it was the person in this process, in this swim lane, that updates it. Let's see what's going on there and see if we can fix that, right? So some success stories with these, and I think lately, or often, especially when you're doing things like master data management, data quality, data governance, it's these process CRUD interactions that often are kind of the nut of some of the issues or solutions we're developing. So this first one is one of my fun examples. We work with a big international aerospace firm, and they were having trouble. And again, some of these things feel really theoretical when you're just, or I'm in data and there's a payment term field. Seems pretty boring to me. But if I'm in finance and I'm trying to do financial projections, the payment terms for my contracts, that's does the vendor pay or the client pay in 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, a year from now is when I get payment? That's kind of a big deal when you're trying to understand, can I pay my staff? When am I going to get the money coming in, right? In this particular company, they had these huge contracts. You can imagine high price contracts. Getting $1 million in 30 days or 60 days is kind of a big deal. And they were different. Like each contract, they would look one contract with the same company. One of it said 30 days, one said 90 days, one said 45 days, and they were just a mess. So we literally had a workshop and we mapped it out, and we saw that different teams were updating it in different systems at different places. This one, I can't always guarantee it's that easy. The folks downstream that were updating it, the contracts team had updated it. Other people didn't know that, and they created it themselves. And they said, oh, I didn't know that. I'll take it from you. Problem solved, like multi-million-dollar problem solved just by some people in a room in the afternoon saying, oh, didn't know that, right? That could have been an argument. It could have been sales saying, no, 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 I need to negotiate the payment terms because it's my client, blah, blah, blah. Could have been. This one was kind of easy and it was just letting people see it and kind of work through it that way. Another example was, and this one I mentioned, there's been several of those across the years, that a retail chain was kind of having issues with the product price being different across sales channels. Sometimes you do that on purpose. In this case, they weren't. You saw it online at 99 cents, and you go in the store and it's $2.99. Well, higher price than that, but you get the idea. It's not a good look, right? So they really tried to understand how that happened and why that happened. And just like with the previous example, 3 separate teams were just doing it differently, and they weren't coordinating it with each other. And so, this group actually implemented a much clearer governance and stewardship. And part of it, I talk a lot about the governance and stewardship, but part of this was just the systems weren't talking to each other. So when we get into data architecture and system architecture, governance is great, but sometimes you don't need the governance if the system just work correctly and are designed correctly and it's just there, right? It has to be just there by having governance and defining how that works. But ideally, you want the systems to work for you so that people don't have to fix this stuff, right? So in this case, it was both. We needed to define it through governance and then automate it through system integration. So those are two great success stories with your good old-fashioned CRUD matrix. So hopefully next year, if we do that survey, it won't be 10%, it'll be 99% because you all are convinced and I want to see them. Okay, that's your CRUD matrix. System architecture diagram, I sort of alluded to. I've seen different versions of these. People kind of call them different things. Is that thing on the lower right a data flow diagram? Is it a system architecture diagram? Again, I don't care what you call it. The one in the upper left is a little more high level, but just designing how all your systems fit together and how the data flows across them and integrates across them is often where we see the issues. And I get it. Things have been built over time. It's your grandma's farmhouse and she kind of built a bathroom off the back. And then there's a bedroom in the corner and it kind of doesn't align, but yeah, it works well enough. Think of that. That's fine on a farmhouse, but think of now you've got a major, again, skyscraper that's not going to scale. And that's what happens. I mean, sometimes we just show how complicated it is to management through these. And they say, oh my goodness, now we understand why it's so complicated data system, right? So these can be really, really helpful in getting that big picture. And this, especially with enterprise architecture and data architecture, I could rant for days and all the reasons I think this happens, but sometimes it's just no one's has the time or the authority or the way of thinking to step back and see how all these systems fit together before we build yet another analytics system that doesn't talk to system A, right? So I'm a big fan of kind of drawing it out this way. One more success story. This was, in a little bit of a plug. We do data strategies often for a living. It's in our name. And that kind of gives you an excuse to step back and do this, which is why they can be helpful, which is we were doing a data strategy and we created with this online retailer an enterprise system architecture diagram, just listing everything out. And again, this is one of those where I had that client say, we look crazy when you put it on paper. No one was crazy. They were either just busy or they weren't talking, whatever. But we saw a whole bunch of redundancies. This happens all the time. This one for me was particularly memorable because they had multiple master data management systems. It was sort of two and a half. They had two real ones, like off the shelf, well-known MDM solutions, and one homegrown one. And if you're not familiar with master data management, why this is sort of funny is that master data management is literally the single version of the truth, right? And it's sort of saying, I wanted a single version of the truth of customers so badly, I created three of them, right? So, I mean, that was one where it sort of felt silly because why would we have multiple versions of the truth? Because again, it kind of was that it was so important. Several groups started in a vacuum, right? They had disparate hubs for BI and analytics. Sometimes there's a good case for that. In this case, it wasn't. It just literally was teams weren't talking to each other. They knew reporting on revenue was important, so they all did it separately, right? And we were able to highlight these gaps in system integration, communication, et cetera. This particular company saved, I'll go to the bottom ones first. They were able to communicate better. They improved the accuracy, but it's all often it can be a challenge to get ROI. This one was easy, right? We saved hundreds of thousands of dollars, if not more, by not having two MDM systems. Those are expensive, And then the homegrown one, let's discontinue that, all of the maintenance costs. So we sort of looked like heroes by just doing that. I don't want to say it's simple because creating these for a large organization can be complex, but even just whiteboarding out, hey, who in the room has an MDM system, right? And so these can be really helpful for getting that big picture and how things fit together. So in summary, I hope I introduced a few maybe more tools in the toolbox for you, or if you knew these tools but hadn't used them and why would I use them, hopefully I convinced you that they're successful, or if you use them all the time and needed more fodder for telling other people why they're great, hopefully that helped as well. But I think the really benefit is to get that business alignment and see that kind of big picture as you're integrating your data solutions. So before we head to questions, I'll give a little plug to data quality next month, which actually we use a lot of these diagrams for data quality all the time because data quality is a business issue. We all kind of realize that often. A plug for us at Global Data Strategy. If any of this is interesting and you need support with this, please give us a call. My go to our website, and my email's on that second slide. With that, I will pass it over to Shannon for questions.
Thank you so much for this great presentation. As always, if you have questions for Donna, feel free to put them in the Q&A panel and of the webinar there, and to answer the most commonly asked questions. I will send a follow-up email by end of day Monday for all registrants with links to the slides and links to the recording. I love all the reactions floating up there for you, Donna.
Is that a new feature? That's kind of cool.
It is a new feature. Yeah, I'm just loving it. So Donna, okay, so I'm a big advocate of process and data mapping. Any recommendations on how to sustain it and making it part of your operating model in BAU to keep it live?
Great question. I think if there is an enterprise architecture team and you're lucky enough to have one, be friends with them. I think also that data governance is a great way to kind of keep this live and have those conversations of governance within the process, because that's where often or with your data quality and root cause analysis, like what in the process is calling, kind of using them as tools as communication is a great, once you start doing that, we do that with data models as well. Hey, I have one client, love them. They're a social services organization. We have a data problem. They said, let's bring up the data model. Let's bring up the process model, and see what might have gone wrong. Is there something that's been added? And so kind of linking that with the stewardship, I found a really helpful way, because the stewards are doing the business processes often. And so sometimes that's a helpful way to keep them maintained.
So indeed, Donna, showing how logical and conceptual data models are key foundation for building AI and machine learning products would really help me to sell the effort they take.
Absolutely. I mean, I think, yeah, I think what's interesting on that is, because I've been doing data modeling for decades, and there's a renewed interest, partly for AI at a very high level. What data are we using? What's our inventory of data? Or what are we training our models on? And or think of things like PII. What are our critical data elements? Are we looking at credit scores of our company customers? Should we be? Is that ethical? And so starting with governance at some of those high level, and then at the physical level, what's our inventory of data we need? And so kind of the semantics of AI, and what data means. Gosh, are we talking about prospect customers, existing customers, high net worth customers? And then physically, what's our inventory of stuff and what are we allowed to use and what's the lineage of it and all that, is often a kind of a good way to, kind of get once AI is in the room, kind of what data we have and what we're training it on is really helpful. And what's the quality of that data, right? We had one customer and they were kind of looking at, well, this was machine learning, not officially AI, but kind of gender differences in clinical outcomes and if the gender field was like 80% empty, well, that's going to be really hard to do gender-based predictions on healthcare outcomes, right? So maybe some of that helped.
I believe so. I've got less than 2 minutes here, so I'm gonna slip in one more question, Donna. So we're about to try interviewing data owners and data stewards to tease out critical data elements. Any tips for that? Is it conceptual first and then link to that to physical elements later?
I would say, yeah, starting with kind of that big picture, take an educated guess on the critical data elements, and telling the stories, and often through a process model can really help. We just did this with one customer, and they're kind of redoing their member onboarding system. So it was a really great time to go to the governance board and be like, hey, what do we want to know about our members? And where in the membership journey does someone update their address? And if they update it, who gets up, so that was everything together, the CRUD matrix, the process, the data model, and I guess, and one more thing, because we're probably running out of time, doing it in the context of a story, right? Because if I had done that same thing and just showed a data model, I would have lost them. But saying, hey, we're redoing our membership journey. That might have been the journey map. They didn't use one, but you could have, right? And what do we want to know about our members and what shouldn't we know? and who owns it is a great way to kind of facilitate that. And then I use all those tools of the trade. The logical, I would say logical even more. Well, you might need a conceptual. What do we even mean by member? But then once you have that, starting to add some of those attributes, less critical data element.
Perfect. Well, Donna, thank you so much for, again, another great presentation. Thanks to all of our attendees for being so engaged in everything we do. I just love that you've been enjoying the new features in the platform, as well as the webinar. So again, just a reminder, I will send a follow-up email by end of day Monday to all registrants with links to the slides and links to the recording. Thanks, everyone. I hope you all have a great day. Thank you. Happy
modeling. Bye.